Whenever there is a big and exciting trend in an industry, what happens is that big companies will capitalize on this trend to acquire the sales success and profits that would often come from taking advantage of said trend. For better or worse, this can be seen in every industry, even in the gaming industry, which is why we've seen FPS franchises be converted into Call of Duty clones for a few years, or why online gaming took the gaming world by storm, or why battle royales became popular, and so forth. And no bigger trend existed than the 3D hype of the 1990s, which saw every company want to jump on the 3D bandwagon by converting their franchises into 3D experiments. Some would succeed with flying colors, and others would bomb hard and live in infamy. And Namco was not going to let their most famous character, the yellow pizza with the missing slice, stay behind in a 2D world. They too want to get that 3D money by converting Pac Man into 3D. But little did anyone know of the intense struggle that would come from trying to convert Pac Man into the third dimension. Today on Beta Quest, we're going to be talking about the insane development of Pac Man's first jump into 3D with Pac Man Ghost Zone. Okay, maybe it's not the first 3D Pac Man, but you get what I mean. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, two radical events were happening in the gaming industry. The first was the aforementioned 3D hype of the 1990s, as the 32 and 64-bit era took over the industry and made 3D gaming possible, and many game companies were trying to adapt their games into 3D to take advantage of the hype. Not only did game developers want to experiment and pioneer in this unexplored territory, finding many creative opportunities to play around in, but many gamers also wanted to see their favorite characters in the third dimension, preferably as polygonal characters. They were also transitioning into 3D to keep their franchises relevant, under the pretense that not jumping onto the 3D hype would result in their franchises being left behind and forgotten. This is why Final Fantasy VII took the 3D route rather than remaining 2D. It's a fact that turned out to not be true in retrospect thanks to the modern indie gaming scene, but in the 1990s, a pure 3D future seemed certain to many companies, and they only wanted to stay safe. The second major event was a major push by arcade companies like Namco and Taito to convert all of their arcade franchises designed for short bursts of play into more long-form experiences. At the time, home console gaming was eclipsing the arcade experience, and quick and snappy games were not as popular or favorable as long-form games on home consoles, like RPGs and adventure titles. As a result, to try and stay relevant, these companies engaged in various experiments to try and expand these short arcade games into these longer games while trying to remain faithful to the spirits of the originals. In the case of Pac Man, Namco not only wanted to take advantage of the 3D future, but they also wanted to make sure that their mascot could be able to handle games that lasted longer than 10 minutes, preferably in the 8 to 10 hour range. Thankfully, their formula had more potential and flexibility to be adapted into longer form gaming in 3D, compared to something like Frogger or Space Invaders, but they weren't entirely sure as to what direction to take Pac Man, and what genre he should be adapted into. To get their answer, Namco commissioned Namco Home Tech to develop a 3D long-form adaptation of Pac Man for the PlayStation 1, in which they presented a basic concept of what they would like by Namco themselves, and were instructed to make a full game out of it. However, despite commissioning Namco Home Tech to develop the project, the team was pretty much constricted as to what they really could do, with Namco being very unsure about letting these developers have free reign over the franchise and putting very strict guidelines on the project. It didn't really help that no one at Namco Home Tech really knew how to develop games in 3D, and were not even given a 3D model of Pac Man from the main company, pretty much forced to make their own render of Pac Man for the project. But regardless, Namco Home Tech went forward with the project, and development would go along at a decent pace, enough for content to be presented to the public. The game was to start off with some type of FMV about a kid who wanted to play the latest arcade game, but every kid was playing it, so he was forced to play that lame and old Pac Man game. Yes, he was insulting Pac Man. However, he was hit by some laser robot thing the Pac Man ghosts made, and he was sucked into the game, which turned him into Pac Man for some reason. And then the game starts. According to the developers, Namco was unwilling to let them use the real Pac Man due to the uncertainty of letting these guys make a Pac Man game. And as a result, the developers had to make their game star a fake Pac Man. I honestly don't know what Namco thought this would do because it makes no sense, but okay, whatever. Anyway, Pac Man Ghost Zone was to be a 3D platformer that was to tragically make use of tank controls, heavily reminiscent of Bubsy 3D. And although they work for games like Tomb Raider, these are lethal for a 3D platformer, because it doesn't work, okay? It doesn't work for a platformer. This is despite the fact that Mario 64 was already a thing at this point, telling developers how to make proper 3D controls for a 3D platformer. The game saw players explore levels that seem average for a 3D platformer at a time, minus the whole thing with the tank controls, with detailed environments, flowing platforms, gimmicks, and the likes. Nothing necessarily bad, although the levels are a bit small for a game like this. Despite this radical change from previous Pac Man games, players could still collect dots and eat power pells to fight enemies, although players could also use the dots as weapons against enemies and even throw them down to use them as a propulsion method for flying? I don't know how that logically works, but okay. It seemed like the goal of each level is to collect keys in order to access the next level, but I'm not sure how that would specifically work. There are also different colored power pellets as well, which likely gave you other powers or abilities, but I'm not exactly sure as to what they do. There are also levels with gimmicks to them, as I've mentioned, such as one where you rolled on a ball that is on a track, and another where you swam through the level, and another where it seems like you have been flying. Though perhaps that last one was a power-up. Maybe. And that's all we seem to know about this game. To be honest, this game doesn't really look that good. Maybe if this was 1995, this would have been somewhat passable, but this was 1997. And Mario 64 was not only out, but other developers were learning that Mario 64 did 3D controls properly, and managed to make things work with the PS1 D-pad at the time, if they were making games on the PS1. But regardless, what even happened to this project? Pac Man Ghost Zone will be presented to Namco very early in its development, with the company wanting to see how development was going, with a demo being presented to President Masaya Nakamura, I think that's how you pronounce that. And the project was absolutely hated, with Nakamura being so disgusted with the project, he wanted to not only cancel the game, but shut down the US division entirely, although he was convinced by other Namco employees to keep them going. Unfortunately, this reaction reportedly precipitated a period in which the game was essentially being forced into an obvious cancellation. What is confirmed is that virtually the entirety of the development team, save for 3 people, were fired left and right as development progressed, allegedly in unflattering ways, and it is also said, but I cannot confirm, that the production schedule was cut in half, forcing the game to be rushed. On top of this, there was also low morale when it came to the game itself, as even the developers were not happy with Ghost Zone, feeling that the game was not as interesting or as eye-catching compared to other 3D platformers at the time, like Mario 64. Despite all of this, there was enough progress made for an E3 1997 trailer to be shown off, which I had shown before in this video. However, shortly after all of that, another meeting with Nakamura was made for the game, which he hated what he saw there as well, but unlike before, the game would officially be cancelled then and there. However, it seemed like there was a change of heart within the company, as Namco would order Namco Home Tech to scrap the entire game and rework the entire project into something else, lifting most of the limitations put on them during Ghost Zone's development and allowing them to make a game that they saw fit, along with pushing the release date a couple of years back to allow for the project to be properly finished. All this resulted in them developing the classic PS1 game Pac Man World 1, which takes a few assets from Ghost Zone but is otherwise a fully original game. And thank goodness for that, because Pac Man World 1 became a high-selling classic on the PS1 that is fondly remembered and has decent sequels, even if they didn't do all that well in Japan, and the last one not being released there too. But despite cancellation, various aspects of the game would be leaked online, including storyboards, gameplay footage, and a sadly unplayable ROM of the game that is really just the E3 demo. Which is cool, but we like Ghost Zone's playable ROM too, if we can find it. Get onto that, y'all. But that was Pac Man Ghost Zone. This is a project that seemed to have suffered a lot of weird drama thanks to a company that was seemingly just making it continue onward despite knowing that the project had no future. While that may have been conjecture, it was a unique form of development hell where the hell is not really the game taking forever to make, but a studio that was facing extreme hostility from a company that seemed to have had it out for them. But at least from this insanity came an excellent game that was developed under far more favorable circumstances than what happened during Ghost Zone's development. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that this is not the only example of this happening in the gaming industry. And by feeling, I mean certainty. But we'll get to those stories later. But until then, this is K-Steel of Beta Quest signing out. I will see you all later. This was a Cobalt Steel video by MS Bernie. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Until next time, see you all later.